Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, May the 20th, 2026, and this is our series on the book of Ecclesiastes. Today we're looking at just chapters 3 and 4. Next week we'll look at just chapters 5 and 6. But in 3 and 4 today, as Solomon is looking back on his life and he's trying to figure out the meaning of life, the purpose in life, and he's remembering some of the things that he did right, some of the things that he didn't do right, and some things that he just plain, flat out messed up. And because he's now older and he's looking backward at what's gone before, and also trying to figure out what do I do with the remaining time that I have left, however long or short that may be, he's discovering some principles that he's sharing with folks. And in chapter 3, it's probably one of the most famous parts of the book of Ecclesiastes. The first 8 verses, there is a time for every purpose under the heaven. I am old enough, because I am 68 years old right now, to where I remember a song that came out in the late 60s. I think it might have been the very early 70s. It was definitely the Vietnam era, when I was still elementary to young teenager. The Vietnam War was going on, and there was a rock music group called the Byrds. They made a very popular song, "To Everything, Turn, 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 There Is a Season, Turn, Turn," and with the exception of the closing line of the song, it was almost a verbatim quote of Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 from the King James Version of the Bible. What the song was about was a bit of a protest over the Vietnam War that the nation was engaged in the 60s through the early to mid 70s. And so they had taken the scripture passage to apply it to their anti-war protest. When we look at what Ecclesiastes 3 actually says, and we're thinking of it in terms of, this is Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, but also a guy who made a lot of foolish mistakes, a guy who started out good for God, but disobeyed God and reaped the consequences of his disobedience. He was king. He prayed for wisdom to rule the people well. God granted him the wisdom to rule the people well, promised him that there will never be anybody more wise than you. But Solomon didn't always act on the wisdom. Sometimes he made the wrong choices, because like anybody else, a human being, just a man with a sin nature, and sometimes the sin nature wins out over your good sense. And now he's an older man, and he's looking back, and he realized that a lot of things that he did, that he had been warned by his father and warned by the scriptures not to do. If you're the king, you're not supposed to acquire great wealth for yourself, not great numbers of chariots or horses. You're not supposed to multiply yourselves wives or gold. And what did he do? He went out, and in the course of his lifetime, married 700 women, gave them the status of wife and queen, took 300 other women just as concubines, and discovered that satisfying his physical urges didn't satisfy the God-sized hole in his heart. Acquired lots of wealth. The first woman he married, Mrs. Solomon number 1, was a daughter of Pharaoh. He knew from the scriptures, he knew from the warning that his parents had given him, that a Jewish king was not supposed to go back to Egypt. He marries not only the daughter of Pharaoh, but he marries daughters of the kings in all the nations surrounding him. Why? Because he's got it into his head that if he marries girls from all these surrounding nations, and he's good to them, their daddies will leave him alone and won't attack him, won't bother him. In other words, he's relying on his alliances with these surrounding nations rather than putting his faith and trust in God. And you and I, here in the 21st century AD, we don't have the ability to be king or queen and make alliances with other nations. But what lesson can we learn from Solomon? Where if you're relying on anything other than trusting God to keep his word to you, you're making the same mistake Solomon did on a smaller scale. You're trusting in other things besides putting your true faith in God. And as he's looking back here, you'll see him contrasting, and these first 8 verses is definitely a Jewish parallel way of speaking something, where you'll say something positive and then contrast it with its negative counterpart. You see that throughout the book of Proverbs. Something will be stated positively and then negatively, and you're going to see it here. And it covers a whole gamut of things. There is an appointed time, and the word appointed time is moed. The way we would spell it in English would be M-O-E-D. It means an appointed time for God to meet with his people. Well, Solomon knows that there are appointed times. They have a biblical calendar that God gave them when they were still camped at Mount Sinai. They were supposed to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. They were supposed to observe certain feasts in the year: Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost or Shavuot, Day of Atonement, Tabernacles. There were holiday feasts that they were supposed to keep, times when God would meet with the people. And he understands that principle, but here he's talking about life in general that every human being experiences, where there are certain seasons or appointed times of life when things should happen, or if they don't happen, you have to adjust to that. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event or every purpose under heaven for human life. Now we look in verse 2 and following all the way down to verse 8 to see the compare and contrast. There's a time to give birth and a time to die. Giving birth, new life coming, the joy of a new baby being born, families growing. You're celebrating that new life, but at every birth there's always the shadow of this child growing up is going to suffer diseases, injuries, heartache, pain. And as much as a parent might want to love and protect and shield their child from experiencing the bad part of life, you can't. They're ultimately going to grow up. They're going to experience good times and bad. And the destiny of everybody is to die. So Solomon is recognizing there's a proper time to celebrate that new life, and the time to recognize that life has its limits. Just a short time ago, when we get here for the afternoon taping, there's an afternoon ladies group that meets, and we were out there sharing some prayer concerns and praise reports, and part of the conversation that we were having with the ladies as they were getting ready to pray for each other and to celebrate the answers to prayer, the praises of life, that the older you get, the more you run into physical aches and pains, and the more you realize the body bruises easier, your health slows down, because you do need to reflect on, okay, we celebrate life when we have young and we're in good health, but we also need to acknowledge the fact that there comes a time when we're just going to age out, and it's right to reflect back on what we've done and make sure that we make our peace with God. There is a time to give birth and a time to die. That's the first pair of contrast. A time to plant and a time to uproot what was planted. And again, that was part of our prayer and praise report, because this area, the town of Enterprise is a growing town. We have a military post nearby. There's lots of industry and aviation related things here because of that military post. But there's also farmers. And part of the conversation was one lady's grandson would really like to be a farmer. And there's Grandma sharing with the group that yes, he knows something about farming, but he doesn't know just how hard it was on his grandfather to farm. That sometimes Grandpa would have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go prepare the field to be ready for planting, and then he would have to work hard in the field and see to it that his crops got to market, and that a lot of times when it was time to harvest, he wouldn't get home until very, very late in the evening. Yeah, the younger man would like to farm some of the land that his grandparents have. And he doesn't understand why Grandpa quit farming. And part of that is Grandpa's aging out and can't pull those kinds of shifts anymore. So there's a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to uproot what was planted. A time to kill, yeah, there's a time when it's necessary to take life. And a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. Whether it's tearing down property and rebuilding, tearing down a home or business, whatever it is, a time to tear down and build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn. When you've lost someone that means the world to you, it's appropriate to acknowledge the fact that you're in pain, that things are going to be different from now on because you've lost somebody that can't be replaced in your life. Even if you find a new relationship, you're still missing that relationship. That it's okay that there's a proper time in life when people need to mourn, and a time to dance, to move forward, to celebrate life again. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up is lost. Sometimes your best healing is in letting go. Solomon's recognizing, he's looking back over life. He's experienced really wonderful things in life, but he's also experienced pain and loss, and he's writing to his nation. He's saying, I'm looking back on life, and he started out saying, I tried a lot of things, and I discovered all of it was vanity. All the stuff that I tried to do to fill that God-sized hole in my heart, none of that worked. And by the time he concludes Ecclesiastes, he's going to get the right answer that, yeah, I did some things right, I did some things wrong. I did some things when it was the right time to do them, and other times I messed up and missed the boat. But the conclusion of the matter is to love and worship God and trust in Him. So he's saying here that there's a time to search and a time to give up is lost, a time to let go. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart, a time to sew together. Because people would know from cloths there that sometimes you have to tear cloth apart and repurpose them for other things. The outfit that you're wearing now may be brand new, may be looking good. But after time, it may wear out and you may need to now repurpose it, maybe to be a polishing rag or for some other type of purpose, and it may reach the point where it's tattered and it's just time to throw it away. He's looking at what you do in life with yourself and with your possessions. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak. People spend a lot of time on that one. Should I say something? Want to make sure I say the right thing and not the wrong thing, because sometimes you should speak up, but if what you say isn't worded right, it can do more harm than good. He's looking back and he's going, there's a time to speak up, but there's also a time to just be silent. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Then he asked the question, what profit is there to the worker from that at which he toils? Now it's interesting because he's the king here, and he has gotten, he was born into wealth. He's been wealthy all of his life. And in fact, we know from the historical books of Kings and Chronicles that when Solomon dies and it's time for one of his children, his son Rehoboam, to step up and be the next king of the nation, Solomon has not prepared his son well. And when the nation is having its inaugural festivities, many of the people came to Rehoboam and let him know, listen, in your father's latter years, he overworked us, he overtaxed us. We're willing to let you be our king, but you need to ease up and change some of the things that your father did. And because Solomon hadn't trained up Rehoboam properly, Rehoboam goes to two separate groups of advisors. Some of the older, wiser men who had counseled his father, and they advised him, listen to the people. They're correct. You have overtaxed those people, or your father has done so. You need to treat them better. And he didn't like the sound of that because it might mean making him uncomfortable, less money in his coffers. So he turns and gets advice from the younger men his own age who respond with what he really wanted in the first place. And a lot of times we do that. If we're talking to people and we claim to be seeking their advice and counsel, sometimes we honestly are looking for answers to the problems. But other times, we kind of already made up our mind what we want to do, and we're just looking for somebody who will affirm what we already thought we wanted. Well, Rehoboam's friends his own age were like, oh no, you gotta show him who's the man here. You gotta show him who's in charge. And he listens to that advice, responds harshly to the people, and they wind up saying, okay, then we're breaking away from you. We're just going to go form a different country. And part of that was because Solomon, in spite of being the wealthiest, wisest man who ever lived, didn't always live up to God's plan for his life, didn't always choose the right thing, and didn't spend the right amount of time training up his son to follow after him to recognize good advice from bad advice. No, Solomon himself doesn't always get the right answer to this question of what profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils. That was the problem, where the people were willing to follow his son as king if they reaped some of the reward of their own labor, rather than Solomon overtaxed them and now his son's going to follow in daddy's footsteps. Verse 10, I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He has made everything appropriate in his time. He's looking back on, there's a time when you're younger and it's time to dance and enjoy life, and time to give birth, and time to work hard. And then there's a time to look back and reflect and deal with problems and issues and recognize what God's done for you. He's made everything appropriate in its time. He's also set eternity in their heart. That's a key phrase there, that God has set eternity in our hearts. Yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning, even to the end. We reach a point in life where we have to acknowledge the fact that we're not God. We're not ever going to be God. We're not going to know everything that God knows. And we have to be okay with having some of our questions left unanswered, because there are some things that's just beyond us from an ability standpoint, and there are some things that God's ways are not like our ways. But because God loves us and because God has created us in His image, we do need to think about eternity. That God has put eternity in the hearts of mankind. This life isn't all that there is. Solomon, in his later years, is realizing that. He's tried wine, women, and song. He's tried searching out knowledge. He's tried acquiring all kinds of wealth. He's tried all kinds of things. And he realizes he's going to get old anyway. He's getting old. That all the possessions and wealth that he's acquired will one day be passed along to somebody else. So, was it worth the time and effort to acquire all this stuff? He realizes that there's eternity out there. What is our eternal destiny? Are we going to live eternally? And if so, are we going to live with God? Are we going to be separated from God? Or is there God? There's those questions that every human being asks. God has set eternity on our hearts for us to know that whatever we're doing here, our legacy only has a short amount of time. Ever since my husband passed, I've made it a habit to go every week out to the cemetery just to check on the grave to make sure the flowers look nice, that the vase isn't too full of water, that there are no ant beds, that sort of thing. And I've seen people come and go at the cemetery. And I've also noticed that there are graves out there at the cemetery where there are no flowers in the vases, where even the headstone or the foot marker is showing sun fading and age. And it's entirely likely that nobody's visited that grave in a long time, that maybe the people who knew that person have died themselves, or that they've moved away from the area. Even when you have a legacy and there are people who remember you, sooner or later, the people who knew you and who care about you are going to pass away themselves. And then there's just a grave somewhere. And if it's in a perpetual care cemetery, there may be groups that occasionally come in and see to it. For example, we have Memorial Day coming up, that if somebody is a veteran, that they're going to get a flower or maybe an American flag placed on their grave by a person who doesn't even know them. They just know this person served in war, whether it was World War II or World War I or the Civil War or just way on back. They're just acknowledging the fact that somebody lived. Eternity matters. And really what matters is, are you related to God? Because the only way that you're going to find the peace that you're searching for is to put your faith and trust in God. And so Solomon is talking about life here, and he's saying that God's made everything appropriate in its time, and He has set eternity in our hearts so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. There are some things that God knows that we don't, and we just have to trust Him. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all of his labor. It's the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There's nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take away from it. For God has so worked it that men should fear him. That which is has been already, and that which will be has already been. The cycle of life keeps repeating itself from generation to generation. For God seeks what has passed by. Furthermore, I've seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there's wickedness. Solomon's been a ruler. He's seen good things happen to bad people. He's seen bad things happen to good people. He's seen justice upheld, and he's seen the righteous suffer very unjustly, because life isn't always fair. I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man. For a time for every matter and for every deed is there. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. Well, we're more than beasts. Unique among God's creation, men and women were created in God's image. When you go back to Genesis 1 and God is creating the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and the animals of the land, he pronounces them good. When he creates man, he says it's not good that man should be alone. Man is incomplete until God creates woman. And when God creates woman and brings woman to man, he now says it's very good. Because Adam and Eve were created in the image of God. Slightly different than everything else that God had created that has life and breath, in the image of God, because God desired fellowship with mankind, male and female. And for a time, they enjoyed that perfect fellowship until they sinned in the garden. So when Solomon is writing this, he's saying God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. We have a sin nature. But we are made in the image of God, and God still yearns for a relationship with us, and God gives us, unique among his creation, the ability to turn to him, to put faith and trust in him, to allow God's plan for our salvation to be received into our hearts so that we can experience that kind of reconciliation to God. God always yearned for us to have a relationship with him. Just like when my husband and I would have an occasional disagreement, one or the other of us would realize, okay, it's time for us to reconcile our hearts emotionally, to put whatever went wrong behind us, and just to go love that person and move forward in the relationship. God has a purpose for mankind. God wants all of humanity to be reconciled to himself. So we have a heart that yearns for God, but we have to come to God his way. Solomon will reach that point. By the time he gets to the end of this book, he'll make a very wonderful proclamation that here's the end of the matter. Worship the Creator in the days of your youth and all the way up to your old age. Worship God. Right now, he's looking back on life and he's not finished understanding about God yet. So when he says, if you take the verse out of context there, when he says that we're but beasts, don't stop there. God's not finished with Solomon. God's not finished with us. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. He recognizes that people and animal both die. As one dies, so does the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. Solomon's not finished working this out yet. All go to the same place, all came from the dust, and all return to the dust. But because we have an eternal soul. After death for us, instantly there comes standing before God. And if we put our faith and trust in God, Christ's blood covers our sins and we are reconciled to God. If we have not put our faith and trust in God, we come under God's judgment for our sins that are not covered by the blood because we chose not to have it covered by the blood. Solomon's still working out in his life what he believes about God. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast descends down to the earth? That's like a question on his mind. I've seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after it? He's kind of in a possibly depressed phase of his life. I've tried all this stuff and none of it's really satisfied me. Maybe the thing to do is just to sit back and enjoy life while I'm here, because this may be as good as it gets. Who knows what's going to happen in the afterlife? He's not to the point yet where he's recognizing and trusting, okay, God, not only is my life, my earthly life in your hands, but I am trusting you with my eternal soul. He will get there, but he's not there yet. And chapter 4, he starts looking again for life's meaning. He's kind of bottomed out here in his vanity, everything is vanity, and his despair time. And now he's realizing, like, okay, I've come to the conclusion that I should just go and enjoy life while I'm here, because who knows what's next. But that doesn't satisfy him either. So once again, he starts looking for the meaning of life. Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. He sees what's going on in the world. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. Stop for a second. That might be true of some of the nations surrounding Israel, that people are oppressing and doing wrong. But Solomon, who are you? You are the king of Israel, the United Kingdom. You have all 12 tribes under your rule. So if oppression is going on in your country, who can the oppressed victims look to for help? Aren't they supposed to be looking to you? The whole idea of being a ruler, of being the king, of being the person in charge, is to do justice and mercy. When he started out and was first made king, we see Solomon seeking God in prayer and recognizing, God, I'm just a young person. I don't have much life experience yet. God, I need your wisdom so that I'll know how to rule the people well. And God grants him that. But Solomon, over the course of his life, has sometimes, because he's human, done the wrong thing, looked the other way. When people are being oppressed, if they're being oppressed in his kingdom, his responsibility as king is not to go find pleasure for himself. It's to be the servant leader of the people. So I congratulated the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still living, because he's seeing injustice and he's saying the dead are better off than the living. Because he's having to come out now of this downward emotional spiral of, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? Maybe the best thing is just for me to enjoy life, and I'm seeing oppression. Hey, maybe the dead are better off than the living, because at least their troubles are over. But he's going to come out of this pit that he's in. But better off than both of them is the one who's never existed, who's never seen the evil activity that's done under the sun. You may remember when we studied Job. Job reached a point in his suffering where he openly says, it would be better if I'd never been born. Because he's crushing emotionally under the weight of all of his suffering. Well, Solomon's going through a phase like that here, where he's saying maybe it's better off to have never been born than just to live, not know the meaning of life, possibly be oppressed, and just die. Maybe it's better to have never existed at all. But he'll come out from this emotional pit, so hang in there. Today's lesson's still going to end on the note of Solomon is now once again seeking the meaning of life. But if you stop with chapters 3 and 4, you'll walk out depressed. No, there's more to the story. He'll get the right answer eventually. But right now he's coming out from under this idea of, why am I here? What's life all about? Is life even worth living? I've seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after wind. The more you get, the more you want. Oh, my neighbor has something, now I have to have it. We would call it in our day and time keeping up with the Joneses. But the more you're spiraling to do that, the worse off you are. Several years ago, there was a commercial that came on TV, and it showed this guy riding a lawnmower. And he's got a big house and a big yard, so he needs the riding lawnmower because it would be more than what he would want to stand behind and push. And he's got this wonderful, brand new car in the driveway, and as he's driving along, he's saying, "Hi, my name is," and he comes up with some name, and he goes, "See my house? State of the art. Like my car? Brand new." And the whole point is, the guy has mortgaged the house to the hilt. He's got a huge car note. His credit cards are maxed out. Why? Because he's trying to provide a standard of living, and he's now barely able to make the interest payments. He's drowning in debt, and he's riding that lawnmower, and he's looking at all the possessions, and people are thinking he's got it made, and he realizes that he's in deep trouble, and he goes, "Somebody help me," because the commercial was about helping people get out from under debt. Because he's like the proverbial rodent spinning on a wheel, and the more he spins, the faster it goes, but he's not getting anywhere. Solomon is like the guy in the commercial, or the rodent spinning the wheel inside the cage. I've seen every skill that's done as a result of a rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. One handful of rest is better than 2 fistfuls of labor and striving after wind. Then I looked again. He's still looking for the meaning of life. Then I looked again at vanity under the sun. There was a certain man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, yet there was no end to all of his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, "And for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure?" This too is vanity, and it's a grievous task. He sees this person who doesn't have a son or a brother, but who's still having to work day in and day out, and he's going like, what's he working for? Who's he going to leave the wealth to? If he doesn't have children to leave it to, doesn't have extended family like a brother to leave it to, he's like the animal spinning the wheel in the cage. This too is vanity and a grievous task. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. For if either one of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there's not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if 2 lie down together, they keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone, 2 can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily torn apart. You'll find that phrase, Ecclesiastes 4, verse 12, quoted sometimes at marriage ceremonies or in premarital counseling, where a minister is trying to encourage an engaged couple that once you get married, God needs to be at the center of your home. Why? Because if God is in control of the home, then the husband and wife are going to be rightly related to each other. And they'll quote this, a cord of 3 strands, in other words, something that's braided together, interwoven, is not easily broken. Solomon is still looking for meaning in life, and he's starting to notice a few things. That being alone and having nobody to leave your stuff to, having no one to care about your legacy is a terrible thing. But he's starting to notice some value in having somebody that you can depend on. 2 people lay down together, they can keep each other warm. Yes, they can. If a person is alone and they're attacked, they may not be able to fend off the attacker. But if they've got somebody there, they can withstand the harm. If they're working together, they can share the labor and share the goodness that comes out of the labor. He's starting to turn that emotional corner to start to see value in life. God himself let Adam see the creation, brought the animals to Adam to name. Before God created Eve from Adam. Why? Because unique among the animals, God wanted Adam to know that it's not good for you to be alone. That here is the other part of you. Here is the person who completes you. God's purpose for marriage. We just finished recording the Song of Solomon study for today. God's purpose for marriage was for one man and one woman to unite together, to become one flesh, spiritually, emotionally, as well as just the physical relationship. And Solomon's starting to realize that it's good for people to have other people as part of their lives, because it's ultimately going to lead him to the conclusion that man or woman living their lives without God means that you die alone and incomplete. But that when you have God in your heart, you are complete and full. He's starting to turn that corner emotionally. A poor yet wise lad is better than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to receive instruction. For he's come out of prison to become king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I've seen all the living under the sun throng to the side of the second lad who replaces him. There is no end to all of the people, to all who were there before him, and even the ones who will come later will not be happy with him, for this too is vanity and striving after wind. Solomon realizes as he ages out that sooner or later people are going to forget about him when he's gone. And yeah, they may run to the next guy, his son, but after a while they'll turn from him and go to the next guy and go to the next guy. It's like people who get so wrapped up in their identity at work, and then the time comes where they no longer have that job. Maybe they got downsized, terminated, maybe they retired. For whatever reason that you left work or that work left you, the next day after you walk out the door, either your job has been obsoleted or somebody else is in there, and all of a sudden your desk, your workstation, your office is now their office, and before long there won't be any evidence that you were ever there. So if you've wrapped up your whole sense of worth and identity and importance in, hey, I had this job and I was this, and now that title, that position no longer exists, and you're out there now trying to figure out, who am I? Why did I spend all that time doing that job? What's my sense of worth? And some people very quickly die after they've retired because their identity was so wrapped up in who they used to be, and now they're not that employee anymore, or that business leader, or that owner, or that whoever, and they don't find meaning in life, and they give up on life. Solomon is looking still for meaning. By the time we get to the end of Ecclesiastes, he's going to find it. He's going to find what his soul is yearning for. The knowledge that, yes, I live my life and I'm trusting in God for my eternity and my future. Right now, he's still searching. I've seen all the living under the sun throng to the side of the second lad to replace him. He's looking at, okay, jobs won't do it, titles won't do it, thrones won't do it. There's no end to all people who were before him, and even the ones who will come later will not be happy with him, for this too is vanity and striving after the wind. He's still looking for meaning. Next week, we're going to look at chapters 5 and 6. And it's going to open up with Solomon's beginning to find purpose in life. And he's also going to recognize that there's a lot of evil in life, that while we're on this side of the grave, because our world is fallen, because our world is broken, that there are going to be good times and bad, and that yes, bad things happen to good people, and that no, righteousness doesn't always win. Sometimes evil has a temporary victory. But God is in control, and that ultimately, when we put our faith and trust in Him, that's when we find value in our life. That's when we realize that it was all worth it. The good times, the bad, that we look forward to the fact that we can trust in God and in His love for us, so that when our time on earth is done, we return to the source of our being, to the God who loves us. Next week, chapters 5 and 6.